Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 10th, 2024. Time for another show. Not that the timing of my actual beginning of the show would let you know that it was time for another show. I'm a couple of seconds behind. I'm going to have to figure out a way. It's going to be a real pain in the butt. Editing this thing and making it fit in case I ever need to use it as a rerun. If perhaps this time next year or 4 years hence, I find myself once again stricken with laryngitis and needing to play today's show as a rerun. But I guess absent that, all right. Well, I could just leave myself a note. Don't use this show. It's all screwed up. There's seconds. Seconds count in this game. I'm not sure what they count for, but they can screw you up pretty well. Time for another show to roll out nonetheless. Friday, the voice was just not up to it at all. And you can probably tell there's still something wrong with it, but it's a lot stronger than it was on Friday. I did think about trying to, power through, do an hour or something like that, but you wouldn't have been able to hear me. You wouldn't have been able to listen to what I was saying. And then it got a little bit painful. But, it was a wild weekend in terms of voice. Like Saturday, most of Saturday, I guess Friday, I had to just sort of whisper around the house. And then, by Saturday, there was some sound to my voice, certainly, but it wasn't mine. And it would have been really comical to try to, to do a show, but for the fact that it really didn't feel all that comfortable. And it struck me that I sounded for most of the day a lot like Jeff Garlin, the actor. When I think of his voice, I think of it from him, shouting about things in Curb Your Enthusiasm, where his voice cracks all the time, and there's this strange hoarseness to it. And then, but I guess Friday afternoon into Saturday morning, there was also this really froggy, low rumble thing, speaking low, and it was kind of really gravelly. And anyway, it would have been a real distraction. But we're back today. There's lots of stories to catch up on. Friday was an issue. I mean, I kept pushing myself to think about doing the show because Friday we had the news that the judge or the judges had rejected the appeal from Steve Bannon to keep himself, out of jail for his 4-month sentence for contempt of Congress. And the word had been handed down that no, he was in fact to turn himself in and begin his jail sentence by July 1st, which would have been an exciting, subject of conversation. Now we're all just used to it. And it's just hanging around in the background. But we can catch up on it a little bit. I don't know whether there's any other legal wrangling to go on. And all the usual suspects saying all the usual dumb things about it. This is a railroading, and how dare they? And even people on social media saying, somebody came up with the theory that, as with everything, what's really going on here is they keep saying Trump wants to be a dictator, but Trump put 0 Biden people in prison. Of course, Biden hadn't been president at that time when Trump was. And so there wasn't really any call for it necessarily. And he didn't put any Obama people in prison either. And of course, that was because, I don't know, if you were to adhere to some of that stupid old rules, like if you commit a crime, then maybe they would come after you, or that would be a reason to put you on trial. Of course, it wasn't until the Trump administration that the administration people were committing all the crimes and then getting caught for it later on. Some of them, by the way, prosecuted during the Trump administration, which is interesting in its own right. But yes, the new Republican bent on this is, Trump didn't put any Biden people in jail, and yet Biden is putting Trump people in jail. So that's hypocritical, which, maybe stop committing so many crimes. That might have something to do with it. Somebody pointing out on social media, here's hypocrisy for you. The Joker never put Batman in prison, and yet Batman tried to arrest and put in prison the Joker. That's hypocrisy for you. It doesn't go both ways. Well, yeah. Anyway, as you can tell, it's been a bit of a weekend. Lots of other things to catch up on. Also, Republicans, top to bottom, really covering themselves in glory. It was, of course, the end of last week, the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion, which involved President Biden traveling to France and meeting with the veterans there. Greg pointing out on Thursday that the Republican message taking away from that, from the video, was, well, they showed video of Biden leaving after having greeted all of the veterans, and President Macron of France arriving and greeting the veterans after him, and trying to sell that as Biden snubbed all the veterans. Well, he did eventually. He didn't pledge to live his entire life alongside the remaining veterans of World War II. He left and made a speech, at which, of course, he lauded their accomplishments and generally spoke to the necessity of guarding democracy in today's world. That, of course, upset Republicans to no end. Rick Scott apparently decided he was going to call Biden's D-Day remembrance speech disgusting. So, that's the usual thing, usual fare you would get from that. A president has said, we defended freedom. We need to continue to defend freedom. Disgusting! Because, of course, he thought that his view of the speech was, well, I'm being called out as a member of the Republican Party for not guarding democracy, which, of course, did not happen in the speech. But he was pretty sure he heard his name in there. And Greg says, Eric Erickson did the same thing. That was the Republican sport after the weekend. Now D-Day is disgusting. World War II is horrible. We were on the wrong side, apparently. And I guess it's what the Republicans back in the early Iraq War days would have said, objectively pro-Hitler. You would print something like that all the time and get away with it. I don't know. I'm not certain how you survive in American political atmosphere saying D-Day is so disgusting, but it's been a long time since it happened, and so therefore I guess you're now entitled to run around saying this was actually the worst thing, and isn't it hypocritical that we would say defending freedom and yet do something like, I don't know, arrest somebody who was stealing nuclear codes and possibly selling to people at their sex dungeon club. I don't know where we got on the wrong track after World War II. But when I was a kid, that was illegal. Anyway, many other stories to scoop up and sift through. Greg Dworkin has gone about the task already, and now we'll do some of the sifting. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. They grind exceeding small. One of the other commenters who did the same thing was Eric Erickson, only he was much more blunt about it.
Oh, okay.
He said, I can't believe, because basically Biden said we're for freedom and democracy, we're against fascism. And Erickson said, I can't believe he deliberately attacked Donald Trump.
He should have gone, might as well have gone all in. I can't believe
everybody looked at it and said, what? He was attacking fascism. Look, if you think that that's Donald Trump, that's on you.
Right.
Although
I hate when they say we're against fascism and we love freedom and stuff like that. It's so annoying. You can tell immediately that they're talking about specific Republican politicians.
Anyway, the big stories over the weekend, aside from Trump being obnoxiously Trump, which we'll get to at his Vegas rally.
Yeah, I won't have to find out if anybody dropped dead from the heat.
Well, many were taken to the hospital. So maybe we'll just do that first.
Oh, okay.
So many were taken to the hospital. And in fact, there's two things that came out of that rally.
Should have given them hydroxychloroquine.
One was, this is from Midas News. I don't usually use them. I sort of think they're sort of on the grifty side, but sometimes they happen to, come across stuff. And what they wrote is in an attempt to pressure people into not leaving the rally before they passed out. Trump suggested they should stick it out because a breeze had just kicked up.
Right. Oh, well, I guess this is the equivalent of coming into Congress with a snowball to refute global warming.
Right.
Okay. A breeze. Stay.
Do you feel the breeze? I don't want anybody going on me. We need every voter. I don't care about you. I just want your vote. I don't care. That's a direct quote.
Wow.
Then he told the crowd that if anybody collapsed, he would have his people splash water on them.
Yeah.
anybody goes down, if you start going down, we have people pick you up right away. They'll throw water. You know, everybody was so worried about you. They never mentioned me. I'm up here sweating like a dog as they're dropping like flies and being taken to the hospital.
Wow.
So, the whole line that I think
so
Biden will use in the fall is that I'm for America and for you. Trump is for himself. And then they'll play clips like this.
Yeah, I like that. I love that's a hell of a quote. I don't care about you. I just want your votes.
Oh, you're just saying, no, he's just saying that.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's usually a line that I would think gets you in trouble, or people say he's not ready for prime time.
So this is someone else quoting on Twitter.
Yeah.
Read this verbatim transcript and tell me whether it's from an escaped mental patient or GOP nominee for the president of the United States. And I would add, but I repeat myself, as Mark Twain used to say. And here's the quote. I say, what would happen if the boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery is now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there. By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. You notice that? A lot of shark. I watched some guys justifying today. Sharks. They weren't really angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact they were, they weren't hungry, but they were misunderstanding why she was there. These people are cray. I mean, he said there's no problem with sharks. They just didn't really understand a young woman swimming. Now, really got decimated and other people too. A lot of shark attacks. So I said, there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat, 10 yards over there. Do I get electrocuted if the boat is sinking? Water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Or do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I'll tell you, that guy I was asking didn't know the answer to that. He said nobody's ever asked him that question. I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of electric current coming through that water. But you know what I do if there's a shark, if you get electrocuted? I'll take electrocution. I'm not getting near that shark.
Okay.
Now he was entertaining people with this monologue, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
No. And then, of course, he should have said, well, what about if it's the choice between being electrocuted on a boat with a battery on it?
Well, before that, just right before that, he had said something along the lines, I know about batteries, I know about this stuff, I'm really smart, I'm associated with MIT, which he isn't. His uncle went there. That's his only association with
I know
MIT.
those letters. That's my association.
Yeah. And as an MIT grad, I resent that.
So. If the choice is between electrocution, a shark, and dropping dead from heat prostration from...
or being bored by a madman, in the heat, ranting on about I don't know what, I think I would take door number 3, personally.
Yeah. They have batteries on boats that are not electric boats. I guess this was his rant was, how can you have an electric boat? Because electricity and water. Well, the inside of the boat is supposed to be dry, for one thing. But for another, diesel-powered boats, they got batteries on them. If your boat's sinking...
Electricity and water, man. Anybody who's ever had a well pump, how can you match electricity with water? You'll get electrocuted every time you try to trade a drink of water from the tap.
I don't know.
What's going on here? I went to MIT. I know all about this stuff. They're different elements, earth, air, fire, and electricity.
Right. Look, this is a guy who says windmills give you and possibly whales cancer.
But that's why it's sometimes important, even though you get sick of him, that's why it's sometimes important to show some of these, he's not lucid.
No.
Well, we'll get that in 2 weeks when we have the debate.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
If he shows.
Right. He may be answering that now. Will you show up for the debate? Yes, 2 weeks. So a very short period of time. Definitely going to show up at that.
Definitely within 2 weeks. And if I don't show that night, I'll show up within 2 weeks.
2 weeks after that.
2 weeks
I did see him get asked at some point, you said something 2 weeks and it's been 2 weeks. And he actually answered that with, yes, I'm getting to that. 2 weeks. He actually talked about, I'll answer why I dodge everything by saying it's coming in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks.
I'm going to answer that at Melania's news conference when we talk about her citizenship.
The other one that never came. Anyway, all right. So he's crazy. He may or may not have killed some people yesterday with the heat. I don't know. And why they took him to the hospital instead of giving them hydroxychloroquine on the spot, I do not know. But They should have told him, if we take you, we might have to vaccinate you.
The Biden campaign should just put up billboards in the Nevada, throughout Clark County, basically, that says, I don't care about you, vote for me, Donald Trump.
Yeah, I guess. Wow. Or also possible in the middle of the desert, put up a sign that says free bird seed, and then we'll suspend a piano above it. See if that works.
Well, the problem with that is that Wile E. Coyote always loses. So,
he never ends up.
You want the Democrats to be the roadrunner.
Yes, well, that's what you want. But somehow I think I get the feeling that these guys would actually fall for this stuff. Have they ever painted a tunnel on a cliff face MAGA rally this way to see if that works?
Yeah.
I mean,
just put arrows toward the cliff. I mean, you're supposed to be at the top of the mesa, just come over here.
Yeah, I mean, actually, driving a mobility scooter into a cliff face probably is not going to happen fast enough to hurt you anyway. So, you got to do the off the cliff one.
Right. just have a sign right at the edge of the cliff saying, "You can do it."
I'm envisioning somebody in a mobility scooter bumping and like several times into the cliff. This tunnel isn't working, but.
No, actually,
it doesn't hurt them.
The Trump voters would, in fact, be on those little golf carts you see up in Florida.
Oh, okay, right, the decorated ones.
Yep.
All right. Well, it was a wild weekend for him and many other crazy things.
But the big news actually was out of Europe.
Right. Why don't we get serious for 1 minute?
Well, why is talking about Europe all of a sudden serious? Because they speak with an accent. They must be really intelligent.
Yes, right. The English guys, they're all smart because of that accent.
Because they're all posh,
Yes, right.
So,
even the ones who aren't.
There was a big election for European Union
Parliament.
Their parliament, and that's often seen as a proxy for local elections. In this case, local meaning national.
Yes. Right,
European Union being the big organization, and then you have local elections for like who runs Germany.
Right. Small things, small places like France and Germany.
Mm-hmm. So what happened basically is that the far right did better than they ever have, but not nearly as well as they were predicted to. So here's some of the headlines coming out of that. In Politico, Hungary's Viktor Orbán stumbles in EU election. Whoop. A new rival, Peter Magyar.
Oh.
I mean, you can't get more Hungarian with a name than
Magyar.
The Prime Minister's Fidesz party has a real challenger. They only won less than 50% of the vote once in the past 2 decades, and that's what happened this time. And the challenger took nearly 30% of the vote.
All right.
And that would give Orbán's party 11 members of the European Parliament, and Magyar's party 7. So that's interesting. Magyar's a rightist, but still, it's a huge failure for Fidesz. And so that's one of the headlines that comes out of it.
They're all dreadful Hungarians.
Marine Le Pen set for record win, exit polls show. And as a response, Macron called for surprise parliamentary elections, which will happen, I think, right after the British vote on July 4th.
Oh, they should do Bastille Day, the 14th.
Yeah. So this is Katie Lee commenting on Twitter. A few thoughts on why Macron's decision to call parliamentary elections because the far right did so well, which seems on the surface to be insane, might not be that insane. French parliamentary elections do not use the same electoral system as European elections. To win a seat as a député, you have to win 50% in the first round, and if not, face a runoff, like in Georgia.
Oh, okay.
We've seen that with the, senators.
That's the way to get Georgia to get rid of it. That's like France, don't you? What?
The upshot is it's a lot harder for a far-right candidate to win a seat in the national parliament because you have to go through that process. Once you get it down to, one-on-one and everybody's aware that they might win, then I don't know, I don't really care about this election, people kind of show up. Mm-hmm. It would have been perfectly legit, she writes, to argue that parliamentary elections are every 5 years, and if you don't like the current parliament, too bad, you'll have your chance to vote them out eventually. But Le Pen et al. Would not have stopped screaming for an election anyway. And this stops that. And it was also likely because Macron doesn't have a majority in parliament at the current time, and he was facing a probable vote of no confidence anyway. So he might as well call the election and make it look like it was his doing instead of him being forced into it. So he does it from a position of strength rather than weakness.
Yeah.
And then gives him a chance to run one-on-one against the threat of Le Pen, which, the French centrists have been winning on this for a long time. It's losing its potency. Le Pen keeps doing, and her party keeps doing better and better and better, first or farther than her. But, it works. So it's chilling that Le Pen and her far-right rivals may together get up to 40% of the vote, but it's not at all surprising given both the results of the last presidential election and how polls have predicted the European elections would go anyway. So there's a lot of far-right people in France, a lot of people who want to see Le Pen in power with an incredibly hardline immigration policy. And that's true in the United States as well. People have to understand that you may not like Biden's moves on, for example, working with Jim Langford to try to come up. Where did we decide he was from?
Oklahoma.
And trying to get a bipartisan border bill that Trump and the Republicans eventually rejected. But the reason Biden is doing it is because in a poll over the weekend, Biden's new policy on closing the border down, if the numbers get above 2,500 a day, popular 70, unpopular 30. I mean, this is what people in the U.S. want. And that move, both with the bipartisan attempt to work with Republicans, too hardline for many Democrats, and this proposal that he has, which is also too hardline for many Democrats, is in fact aimed at Hispanic voters in Arizona and Nevada. And it's just hardball politics. And every time the Democrats play hardball politics, Democrats get upset.
Well, they don't like that stuff. I would rather it go my way.
I'd rather you aspirationally do what I want rather than hardball do what you need to do to win.
Yeah, well,
I understand why that's tension. There should always be that tension, but you have to understand sometimes the guy in power who's actually running is going to pick I got to do this to win.
And he thinks that'll do it. Sometimes there's an argument about whether they're right about whether that's going to reach the.
That's true, and that's a legitimate argument to have. I'm not saying that everybody who opposes what I just said is wrong. I'm just saying there's logic to it, and that's what he's doing.
I would have preferred to just say that. But, yeah, okay, understood. That's a complex one for you. Most things are, if you look closely enough. Most things are complex. Hey, since you brought up complex, let's move from Europe to Israel. What?
That'll cost a lot because it's a big distance, and so the U-Haul that you have to use is going to cost you. But moving to Israel, Benny Gantz over the weekend, the centrist partner in the war coalition, pulled out of the government.
Yes.
As his political alliance breaks up, Netanyahu faces a battle at home. The Israeli prime minister is likely to become more dependent on the right-wing partners in his coalition.
Great.
Including Ben Gvir, who's internal security, and Smotrich, who's the finance minister. But it also puts a lot more pressure on that government to produce people in Israel, voters, regular people.
Okay.
We're actually giving Netanyahu the gloss, the illusion, accepting the illusion and the gloss of a bipartisan moderate government because of Gantz. And now that he's gone, that's gone too. And so it's very clear what Netanyahu has left is complete dependence on right-wingers like Smotrich and Gvir and Ben Gvir, who are basically West Bank settler thugs.
Yeah, I mean.
That's who they are.
That's it.
That's who they represent. That's who their parties are. And so international pressure on them is going to increase. Pressure from the U.S. is going to increase. And their need to produce is also going to increase. So it's not a stable situation. What the New York Times writes up is Mr. Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, another powerful member of National Unity, which is the other opposition party that was in coalition government, also left Mr. Netanyahu's small war cabinet. They're both former military chiefs who were widely viewed as key voices of moderation in the five-member body, which was formed in October after the Hamas-led assault on Israel prompted the Israeli bombardment and ground invasion of Gaza. The two centrist politicians raised public confidence in the government's decision-making process and lent the war cabinet an aura of legitimacy. Mr. Gantz accused Mr. Netanyahu of political procrastination, suggesting he'd been putting off critical strategic decisions like who's going to run Gaza after Hamas is gone, for example.
What are you trying to do here?
And what's your plan to get the hostages back? You have no plan. His decision to quit the wartime government ushers in a new period of political instability and left many Israelis wondering where the country's going from here. So describing the political shakeup as, quote, incredibly consequential, end quote, Yohanan Plesner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute nonpartisan research group in Jerusalem, said in a statement Israelis has already been given low grades to the government on a host of wartime issues, including handling of the fighting, relations with the U.S., and with Gantz's absence, I expect these grades to become even lower, but that doesn't mean that Netanyahu's gone any minute. It is true that increased voices for calling an election are just going to grow. And so we'll have to keep an eye on that and see how that develops. But that's what's going on there.
I guess.
And is it complicated? Oh, it's really complicated.
To say the least. I mean, I don't know. There's nothing I can say to this. I have no idea. And I assume that they get elections at some point, but I don't even know what to make of that. This is like the 400th election with Netanyahu, and he keeps coming out at the end.
He doesn't always win.
Prime
He's
Minister.
Lost, and then he wins, and then he loses, then he wins, then he loses.
Then he wins again, so, you know.
Well, after this, he's not winning again.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've mostly covered the entire world, as it turns out. So there's nothing left. No news.
Well, a couple of things.
I knew there would be something.
You may have heard,
yes.
And people have been pushing the idea that Russia is having this big advance on Kharkiv, and therefore they have this offensive that is just going to defeat Ukraine. It failed.
Oh, what? Actually, I hadn't been thinking about it at all. But it is something that Russians typically say about their everything, about their advances.
This is from The Hill. U.S. says Russia's advance on Kharkiv is all but over. White House said Friday Russia's offensive in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region had stalled and is unlikely to advance any further. It appears, from a layperson's point of view, that if you give Ukraine weapons and allow them to use it, they beat the crap out of the Russians every time.
Well, it's certainly been a good run for Western American arms manufacturers. They've clearly been making the right stuff.
Yeah, and the Russian manufacturers are really not doing all that well. They brought out their new models, and they look,
not
like
their
tanks
girlfriends
with boxes on them, and they look like, just like improvised.
Yeah,
I don't know what, they call them turtle tanks because they have all this weird looking armor because they just get pounded all the time, and they continue to get pounded all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess it shouldn't be
any surprise.
In
fact, over the weekend, a Ukrainian drone took out the Russians' most advanced stealth fighter jet.
What? Really?
Yeah, on the ground.
I saw that. Oh, okay.
Before it was up in the air.
It seems like well, that's where you'll have a chance at it, I guess.
Right.
Still, even so, 20-something years of extractive gangsterism, the people who are in charge of designing and building Russian munitions were only secondarily interested in producing any of it. Well, to the extent that I have to put a metal hunk on the ground and say this is military equipment in order for me to be able to extract my payment from the Putin gang, I'll do it. But does it have to work? I don't know. We're not going to have any wars, so who cares? Oh, we are having a war? All right, well, then I should take everything I can out of my bank account, stay away from the windows, and move to Azerbaijan or something and see if I can get out of here. Gangsterism doesn't actually, build infrastructure, as it turns out.
Right.
Oh, well.
Now, there's a bunch of non-definitive polls that were out over the weekend. Most of the polls lately are showing a 1 or 2 point movement toward Biden, which is exactly what you'd expect if, for example, the conviction of the former guy as a convicted felon starts making the rounds and actually filtering out to people who don't watch the news. You don't expect a giant 10-point swing. That's not what happens. What happens is you find, like in the YouGov polls that have been out for various outlets, that the independents now favor Biden over Trump. You don't really know who's going to vote, who's a likely voter, who's going to show up. There's a whole bunch of stuff you don't know, and people don't really know now how they're going to vote in November, especially for the undecideds and the double haters. Point being, the trend that you see is exactly what you'd expect if things are moving Biden's way. Will it continue remains to be seen. How will the final polls look remains to be seen. How's the election going to go? We'll have to wait on that. But, none of the polling information is bad. There's another poll from, I think, one of the Latino pollsters, Latino, showing that for the most part, disaffected Latino voters aren't interested in voting for Trump. What they're trying to do is decide between Biden not voting and third party, which is interesting to me because third parties always fade. It's the John Anderson effect. It's interesting early on, and then, when the election starts getting closer, things just get real.
Or what happens if the third party guy says, I have brainworms? Like, does that translate? I don't know. This is an interesting third party person to be even looking at, and I don't know.
Right. Let me send you that link to the poll. It's from Voto Latino.
See. There you go, Spanish.
Disenchanted with the two-party system are more likely to consider support for a third-party ticket than a full left-to-right swing, according to a new poll to be released today. According to preliminary poll results, President Biden maintains 2020-like leads among Latino voters in swing states, but younger and female Hispanic voters are increasingly open to vote for third-party candidates like RFK Jr. I'm just not worried about that. He's going to fade. He's just awful.
And then there's always, I'm increasingly open to it. Okay, he says he has brainworms.
Does that mean you're going to vote for him? Well, not after I heard what he had to say.
Yeah, right. I was open, and I'm still open if he, if he were a sensible person, then I'd vote for him.
I'd consider voting for him if he were somebody else who stood for different things.
Yeah, I like, open is a thing that people like to be. And
exactly.
So, okay, I'm open. Not to that guy, but, some other, a fourth party, if you will. Okay, I can believe it. It certainly makes more sense, if anything makes any more sense than another, than saying, you know what, I'm open to Trump, who thinks I should be thrown off a cliff into the ocean. I'm against that. And this guy here, I don't know. I don't even know, and I hope never to know, what is Kennedy's immigration stance. He's probably, put it out there. He realizes as much. He needs to have a position on it. I'll be damned if you think I'm going to read that. No, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I don't care what the position is. But I suppose you could be open to it and read it and find out that it's somehow, not as horrible as Trump. And it'd be easy to believe now, and in particular, now that he's forced into or is searching for compromise positions, that they're not going to be too happy about Biden's position either. But yeah, I don't know. Settling on brainworms Kennedy for any reason, I don't think so. But you never know. I don't know what information is reaching them. Okay, it's complicated everywhere. This is terrible. I want a simpler time. When America was great. Wait a minute. I feel like I understand now. Are they? Oh, by the way, now would be a great time to do interviews in diners with people recently discharged from the hospital in Nevada, and see.
That I don't know.
I
was reading this
supporting
interesting
Trump.
article.
Yeah.
In Slate by Zach Carter, who has an interesting theory which matches one of my theories.
Oh, that's why it's so good.
It's called inflation.
I found this on the web for which matches one of my theories. Check it out.
Siri,
Thanks, Siri.
Thanks, Siri.
Okay.
You know what? Just let's have Siri do the rest of the show.
We should.
Hey, all right.
Instead of natural unintelligence, we'll have artificial intelligence. So the title is Inflation is not destroying Biden, but something is. And he goes through all the economic numbers, pointing out the economy isn't really all that bad. And it just doesn't make sense. Carter had better approval ratings now than Biden does. And Carter had a much worse, double-digit stagflation sort of situation. And he says, I don't have a pat explanation for Biden's bad polling or all these weird readings on economic sentiment. My best guess is housing is a significant part of it, but people don't talk about it much anymore. The pandemic was rough, and it was in full swing across Biden's first year in office. 1 million Americans died in the first few waves, and a lot of things in the post-pandemic era still don't really work. Millions of students still haven't recovered from pandemic-era learning loss. It takes forever to see a doctor. Whole neighborhoods get drawn into oddball conflicts, like Loudoun County, for example. The last two cold and flu seasons were so horrendous, there was national shortages of children's Tylenol and children's Motrin.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
And one thing people like to do after a bad stretch is start over. But if you can't afford to move, you can't afford that fresh start. So maybe voters are wrong about the economy, but it's hard to blame them for wanting a new beginning. And, of course, my theory, as you know, because I've told you, and you pay attention to what I say,
that was
I remember every word and hang on, is that when you have two essential incumbents running against each other, voters can't put the veneer and illusion of all the things I want in a president. I'll assume this guy that I don't really know is going to be, and therefore I'm really excited about voting for him because it's the new beginning that I want. That's how Obama got to be so popular.
Yes, I could see that. And
when you're a blank slate, you get to write anything you want. But you can't do that with Trump. Everybody knows who he is. You can't do that with Biden because everybody knows who he is. They've both been around for decades. And so the American public which loves new stuff in their politicians is really bummed out because, where's my new stuff? Where's my new start? Where's my new politician? It's not there. We know these guys.
I mean, maybe to some extent that explains interest in Kennedy, but then, because he's a third party candidate, but then again, he's a Kennedy and everybody says, I think I may be wrong, but I think I know what that's about because I'm familiar
and
with.
You are wrong because the family says he's not about that at all.
Right. But
which is one of the things you'll find out when it gets closer to the fall.
Right.
But
doesn't
nonetheless,
actually matter
this
that
whole
you're
idea
wrong. Just think you're right.
About general malaise is because things were bad And we can't project the future onto a new person because there are no new people.
That is an interesting theory. I saw another one over the weekend, although I didn't put it aside because I was like, well, economics, blah. I'm not going to be talking about that. But somebody else was saying, I guess their theory is, while all of the economic indicators, which you usually point to decide whether or not the economy is good or bad, and there's no mixing the two, that despite all the microeconomic indicators saying, well, low inflation, high employment, etc., it still remained the fact that there was big inflationary pressure on the big ticket items, the things people tend to worry about all the time anyway: housing, college costs, etc. Yeah, cars, all the big ticket stuff that have seen prices go through the roof and stay there. And say, all right, well, I'm employed and inflation is low and the gas prices are coming down and groceries prices are coming down, and that's good. But I'm still thinking terrible doom-like thoughts about, the big and long-term care if you're caring for a parent or getting ready, looking ahead to retirement, or long-term care for yourself. And a lot of the big-ticket items really hang like dark clouds and give you this general feeling of dread, despite the fact that, everyday prices and inflation and the employment picture have been very rosy, and hard to get past the feeling of doom hanging over your head from the big ticket items. It's a real possibility too. And it had the ring of truthiness to it. I don't know whether there's any research behind it or not, but certainly a possibility. And then the only thing you have to latch onto is Brainworms Kennedy. That's not going to help you either.
Right, exactly.
All right.
In the end...
Yes. Is that now?
Still have to step back and say, okay, well, if people feel that way, does that mean that they won't vote for Biden? And the answer is no.
Okay.
A lot of them will reluctantly vote for Biden, but a reluctant vote counts the same as an enthusiastic vote.
Yes, that's true. You can't tell the difference when you're counting them, even if you count by hand, as it turns out. So, that's not going to change much either. And, ultimately, if when voting day finally rolls around and you say, well, I'll tell you what, the big ticket items were scaring the crap out of me 4 years ago as well. But also we were having Great Depression level unemployment, and it wasn't really clear whether we were going to ever recover and get things right again. And then we did. So I'm going to go with the guy who did.
Right. There's a new, speaking of polls, a new American Jewish Committee poll of Jewish voters. Biden 61, Trump 23, largely unchanged from 2020. Again, we talked about the fact that...
Despite a war.
Despite what you read about Gaza from the left, things haven't changed. Students, for the most part, do not put Gaza as one of their top 5 things they care about. It's not that they don't care about it. It's heartbreaking. It matters. It's wrenching, but it's not affecting the vote.
There's a pretty big divide between people for whom that is the central issue of the time. And they legitimately feel that way, and they're right to do so.
And they legitimately weren't going to vote for Biden anyway.
Yeah, well, that may be. Or some of them may still, but yet, feel very passionately about this. But generally speaking, in the face of, all sorts of horrors, students are generally about getting through their schooling and then getting a job.
I still remain annoyed about most of the media coverage of finding some Republican, denizen of Dearborn, Michigan, who says, "I'm not voting for Biden."
When there's plenty of Democrats who will say it now, and if you really want the feature, you can find it. Why don't you speak to some of them? I don't know. I guess it's easier to go through your Rolodex and find a Republican. Or sometimes these Republicans just say, give me one of those Democrat hats. I'm going to go talk to the press and pretend I'm a Democrat. That does happen. Well, diners. You know how it goes. It's been an experience, to say the least. All right. Lots of other things to catch up on, too, by the way. Yet more reporting from ProPublica about Clarence Thomas. I'm sure you've
seen it. I just despair of those stories because I don't see anything getting done about it.
There isn't much.
I mean, he's obviously a crook. He's obviously corrupt. He's obviously terrible. By the way, he's not a very good lawyer. But what are you going to do?
Not a very good economist or family or home economist. Anyway, as it turns out, too. I found it very interesting. Which it wasn't revelatory in any way. We already kind of knew all the stories, but it was interesting laying out the timeline as ProPublica did, saying, begins the story with Clarence Thomas sitting on the beach at the 5-star Sea Island, Georgia resort, worried about his finances, which, right away, I'm like, well, maybe I thought you liked camping out in Walmart parking lots. If you're worried about your finances, shouldn't you be there? To which he says, oh, yeah, I should. So I should get an RV. So I should get a $250,000 RV. I'm starting to see how your finances are falling apart, though. I got that level of understanding which was amazing because he didn't get that level of understanding. I understood Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas could not figure out Clarence Thomas, however. So it was interesting, just from putting together the background and then realizing he's not, maybe he shouldn't have been on this panel of 9 wisest people in America kind of thing. I think we blew it. On that one, and maybe 7 others as well. So
that's it for me for today.
All right.
It's so weird because when I come on Mondays, and I haven't been on the show since Thursday, so that's 4 days worth of news, and the Monday segments are always the shortest of the week.
Are they? Well, there's certainly plenty, and then usually on the
last 10 minutes. I always seem to run out of stuff to say around 9:45.
That's okay. That's a long way to go. And although the truth be told, you usually then say, "Well, that's it for me." Oh, wait a second.
Except for these other 9 articles I want to just mention that I came across. Right. But, and that's what we did today. I thought I was done at 9:30, but here we are.
See.
But still, I think what happens is that Saturday and Sunday simply aren't the same kind of news days as during the week.
No, they're not. And,
especially in summer.
For the last couple of weeks, a trial was restarting, which would make Wednesday a very heavy catch-up day. So, and you know how he is about catch-up. I'm still shaking my head
over the fact that Joe Biden went to honor veterans in France.
Yes.
And Republicans are taking that as a direct attack on Donald Trump.
Right. Well, they're very odd people. And they want to find that.
Donald Trump has done more for veterans than anybody else living, said John Barrasso. It's like, you guys are so screwed. You are so screwed. Well, you're not convincing anybody, and you just look awful.
And you might be killing your supporters by having rallies in the Las Vegas heat for them. So, all right. Well, I'll take the thing from here. And I'll tell you what some of the news is if you want to listen in. But
it's always an option, isn't it?
Yeah. Or you could just sit there and listen and say, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of another story." I have. Let's see. Among the other things that I have sitting and waiting, I thought was interesting reading the New York Times article about this is not unique, but it's always amazing to see people who January 6th convicts. The ones not sitting in prison right now, some of the people that have served some time and been released or what have you, who are now running for office. And there are many. And today's feature is Elias Irizarry, I'm guessing is the pronunciation of his last name, a very young man in South Carolina, under the headline in the New York Times of, he said he was ashamed of storming the Capitol. Now he's running for office, which sounds interesting. I was just sort of taken aback by this. This is somebody who was 19 years old when storming the Capitol, joining them on January 6th and smashing his way in, and now running for office. And due to this one
weird trick, he's now 18 and running for office.
Yeah, it's kind of odd. And I thought he was running for Congress, which would have been odd as well. And thinking, well, doesn't anybody notice if he was 19 on January 6th that he's not 25 yet? But he's running for state legislature in South Carolina, which I guess, as soon as you're old enough to get married in South Carolina, what is that, 5, 6? I don't know what the real law is, but I guess you can also run for, I don't know what the minimum age running for office is, but I guess he's attained it. It was very interesting because he was a student at the Citadel at the time. And now he is, as they say in passing, a recent graduate of the Citadel, which I would have thought, like at some point, I clearly misunderstand the political sentiment at the Citadel. I would have thought, a military academy where you got arrested and served time in federal prison because you smashed your way into the Capitol would mean, I would think, I don't know, demerits, KP, something. They still do that, extra PT perhaps. Apparently not. Apparently, down at the Citadel, they found it in their hearts to give him a chance at redemption and still graduate with, the supposed honor of being a Citadel graduate, even having, smashed your way into the Capitol and punched cops. So there's a redemption arc for you. Move to South Carolina where they're tolerant. I don't know. I found that interesting. I also found it interesting that he thought at 19 years of age, he was so frustrated with how rigged the system was that there was nothing to be done for America but smash your way into the Capitol and physically beat members of Congress in order to stop them from effecting the orderly transfer of power. And then a few years later, he now realizes, now I see what they meant. I should have been doing. I could have, if I was dissatisfied with my representation in government, stood for office myself. I jumped the gun. The first thing I did was try to sack the Capitol and hang the vice president. And now I realize I should have perhaps put some ideas forward and stood for election instead. And he's hoping that everyone will see things that way and send him to the state capitol, where no one will smash the windows.
If I'm not mistaken, today's the day that Trump does his probation interview via Zoom.
Yes, right. I think you're right about that. And I heard some interesting, weird, contradictory stuff about what he needed to do and when he needed to do it. But yeah, that's a good point. And another thing, somebody over the weekend in social media making a good point. Usually finding out that a major party's nominee for president has got to meet for a pre-sentencing conference with their probation officer is a big downer for you. But it was worth 1% in the polls over the weekend. So, as you pointed out, it's a slow process. But
so as Katie Fang notes, Trump's a repeat offender. There's a reason why he has multiple indictments in multiple jurisdictions. Trump's also a pathological liar. He's a walking red flag for reoffending. And so, maybe he'll spend time in jail.
Yeah, that would be nice for them to get around to doing that.
Other things that she points out are important: his lack of remorse, his aggressive and repeated denials of culpability, his gaslighting, blaming of others, urging his cult followers to attack others. That'll all be considered by the probation officer. Okay.
There's some probation officer in New York never thought, well, I don't know. I guess if they've been serving in New York for long enough, they might say, eventually Donald Trump's going to be on my caseload.
I've seen it all.
Yeah. Well, it'll be very interesting. I guess he brings his lawyer with him, which I think is unusual, actually. But he petitioned the court, and Merchan went out of his way to say, if I don't let him, it's no harm in taking the lawyer, and if I don't let him do it, he'll complain how rigged the system is against him. So fine.
Did you cover the complete and total hoax of a crap poster suggesting that on Facebook, I am one of the jurors' cousins, and I hear that he's going to be found guilty tomorrow?
Yeah, I didn't.
And Merchan heard about it and said, I am obligated to inform you all that we're investigating this because that's what we do. Yeah, and it was a complete hoax. And the crap poster said, no, I'm a crap poster. This is what I do.
Yeah, I didn't cover that. I wasn't even sure how to explain that beyond. Well, it did it. Somebody basically trying to create controversy by claiming that they had firsthand evidence of corruption of the jury.
Which was seized by the Republicans saying, see, the whole thing was rigged. I told you.
Yeah, but
which was his intent. That's why he put that up.
I get it. Yeah,
it doesn't affect anything, and that's already a story that's faded. So it didn't really work the way the guy wanted it.
Didn't make it out of the weekend. So yeah, that's here it is. It was Philip Anderson I was thinking of. Who was saying, "I'm so old I can remember a time when the phrase pre-sentencing interview with probation officials in connection with a presumptive nominee for president would be so incomprehensible as to be ridiculous, and yet here we are." Okay, so. True enough. And plenty of stuff to go over, by the way, in the next hour. Another of the big stories. Too long to squeeze in the first hour, but maybe the second hour. Another preview of another behind-the-scenes bureaucrat worm for Trump. We've heard his name before, right? It's Russell Vought. He's been in the news, but once again launching a Project 2025 style assault on everything.
He is a very far-right nutcase.
Yeah. The other bald, prematurely aging, psychopathic Trump nutcase. Not the Stephen Miller one, but the other guy, Russell Vought. So, yeah, really, astonishing, except that you've kind of heard it all before. And Trump really does intend to stock his campaign and administration to the extent he administers anything with these guys.
So if Trump loses in November, do all of these like Project 2025 documents, plans, bulletins, slick magazine style descriptive, they all like go on eBay for sale?
If they've been printed, I guess you could do that. And
because like they won't be of any use.
No, all the tournament stickers, put a 8 or 9 over the 5. It's now Project 2029, and whether or not it's Donald Trump repping it, I guess they just keep this playbook. They're not going to have anything else to do at the Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation is flying its flag upside down on its building now. So they're not going to throw it out.
They turned the entire building upside down.
That should have been.
They're so into it. They just they went all in.
Yeah, why not? They can go ahead and that would probably work out very well for them. I assume they just cling to these plans, and I don't know whether. I guess the fight. It'll be interesting to see what the primary fight is like in 2028 among Republicans. I guess it's the same thing that they had this time, except presumably without Donald Trump. I don't think he wheels himself around for that.
Well, the primary will be a fight between J.D. Vance and, Tom Cotton.
I guess. I mean, does DeSantis try again? I don't know.
Yeah, nobody likes DeSantis. And Marco Rubio will, circle the water and pretend to be a vice presidential candidate.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, so they all keep that material, I guess, and then put their own stickers on top and say it's their original idea, presumably. Yeah. All right, well, we made it all the way to the end. I knew there would be something to talk about. We'll see you on Wednesday and talk about all the rest of it.
See you then.
Thanks, Greg. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, well, let me read you that story of the young fella, the young callow fellow from South Carolina, who's set to run for office now that he's discovered that there are things you can do when you're dissatisfied with government and the way things are running, beyond smashing the windows of the national legislature and attempting to assassinate everyone inside. He now realizes there's an alternative path. He said he was ashamed of storming the Capitol. Now he's running for office. Many people are doing that. There's a good dozen, I think, from around the country. Some of whom were actually running for a seat in the Congress that they attacked on January 6th. But there's a little bit of a contrition thing in the middle, of all this. Elias Irizarry, it's Irizarry. I'm going with Irizarry on this. Participated in the January 6th riot. Now he's running for the legislature in South Carolina. Will voters see it as a liability or an asset? That's like a real question that you have to ask about South Carolina voters. Richard Fawcett, not the kind that you get the water out of, but I'm guessing, is that the pronunciation anyway? Fawsset. I'm sure a famous reporter and well-known, and actually I'm pretty sure I've read plenty of his stuff before, but here I am screwing up the name anyway, possibly. Reporting from Rock Hill, South Carolina, which I guess is supposed to be the epicenter of this guy's, it's either the epicenter of this guy's legislative district for which he's competing, or the nearest place with internet service, where he took a hotel room and found from there. Rock Hill, of course, many longtime listeners will recognize as one of the East Coast, certainly the Southeast regional gun fail capital. Rock Hill was just constantly in the news during the peak of gun fail days, with people accidentally shooting themselves, accidentally discharging their weapons in fast food restaurants, etc., etc. But in this case, something completely different. For more than 2 years after Elias Irizarry breached the U.S. Capitol, with other Trump supporters breached. I mean, I guess that carries some connotation too. But anyway, he wrote a letter to Judge Tanya Chutkin. Same judge was overseeing his case as overseeing Donald Trump's case. What an honor. As he waited for her to determine his sentence, he wrote, "I want to make clear that I am not writing to make excuses or defend my actions." Okay. He had told Judge Chutkin of Federal District Court in Washington, "My participation in an event like January 6th has brought great shame upon myself, my family, and unfortunately my country." So it's sounding good, like maybe there's some contrition there. Today, Mr. Irizarry, a recent graduate of the Citadel, they deemed it appropriate for him to be able to continue and graduate and call himself a Citadel graduate. This, of course, the renowned South Carolina Military College. He is now mounting a primary challenge to a Republican in the state's House of Representatives. His website recently noted his prosecution for engaging in, quote, nonviolent activities at the Capitol on January 6th as proof that he has, quote, always stood for the conservative movement. The conservative thing to do, of course, being storming the Capitol. At every pivotal moment of the America First movement, the website declared, Elias has been there. Now, he's 22, and I don't think it's actually possible. But, that's just the sort of standard phrasing for a political website, even if it's not true. The reference to January 6th disappeared from the website after the New York Times discussed it with Mr. Irizarry's federal public defender. In a text message Sunday night, Mr. Irizarry said that he had initially mentioned his involvement in the January 6th riots on his website bio, quote, for the sake of transparency. Mr. Irizarry declined interview requests, but much of his story is detailed in his court record. He was 19 when he entered the Capitol through a broken window, wearing a red MAGA hat and carrying a metal pole because of how nonviolent he is. Since then, Judge Chutkin, Republican politicians in South Carolina, and the Citadel have all grappled with the question of whether he deserves reproach or redemption, a question being asked in one way or another by many of the 1,200 plus Americans charged with taking part in the January 6th attack. In the South Carolina primary on Tuesday, the question, that's tomorrow, will fall to voters in the state's House District 43, a rural area so conservative, how conservative is it? So conservative that Democrats are not fielding a general election candidate. 2 years ago, the incumbent, State Representative Randy Ligon, 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 I don't know how he would pronounce that. Probably originally Ligon, and but anyway, probably Americanized, anglicized since then. Randy Ligon faced a primary challenger who called him Rhino Randy Ligon. Mr. Ligon won by a mere 139 votes. This year, that challenger has endorsed Mr. Irizarry. Perhaps more important, Mr. Irizarry, appears to have bet that primary voters would see his federal trespassing conviction as a badge of honor. Some clearly do. And apparently the Citadel thought it had no role in helping Americans decide whether or not it was an honorable thing to do as a military academy cadet to storm the American Capitol building. On Wednesday evening, Grant Martin, 72, a retired property manager from Richburg, South Carolina, said he had not researched the race yet, but he said that given Mr. Irizarry's participation in the riot, quote, I would be more apt to vote for him. If I could, I would have been right there, Mr. Martin said of the January 6th attack in 2024. That's what he's saying. If I could have, I would have done that. So Irizarry says, I've learned my lesson and I know I shouldn't have been there. Mr. Martin, 72, a mature gentleman, by all measures, having reflected on it for the past couple of years, says, I actually reject Mr. Irizarry's position on what Mr. Irizarry did and would have done exactly what he did at the time instead. Which, I don't know, if that works for you politically, maybe you have brainworms. Though many Republican leaders, well, actually, I mean, what he's really saying is, I see through this fake contrition, and I understand that Mr. Irizarry, at the young age of 22, as a military college graduate bound by a code of honor, is winking at all of us. I was lying to the federal courts. Don't you understand? Wouldn't you want to do the same? Yes, I would. And I want a representative who will, in fact, graduate from military college, learn to swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, but be lying and even be arrested in a outward incident manifesting that lie, and then lie to the court about my contrition, and then stand for election on the wink and nod that I was lying. I'm for that. Wow. Well, this was the state to fire on the fort, Sumter, and start the Civil War. So I suppose it should come as no surprise, even though it's some 150-something, 60-something years later, and these guys weren't around. Probably not even their families around at the time, actually. But anyway, nonetheless, they've absorbed the culture somehow through statuary and display of the flag of the losing side. I don't know. Anyway. Though many Republican leaders denounced the attack in the immediate aftermath, former President Donald J. Trump, in case you thought he was a different Trump, the party's presumptive presidential nominee, has more recently sought to rebrand the rioters as unbelievable patriots. A CBS News YouGov poll in January found that the percentage of Republicans who approve of the January 6th rioters has risen to 30% from 21% in 2021. Among self-identified MAGA Republicans, approval stood at 43%. I'm surprised they couldn't get to 50. That's interesting. That's something to remember. I mean, I know that's supposed to astonish us. 43% in favor of this outrageous act of treason. That's crazy. But on the other hand, if you stop for a second, Greg would remind us of this. You mean among self-identified MAGA Republicans, there's, I guess, presumably 57% disapproval, or either, I mean, I guess it could be 57% no opinion. There's no disapproval. I don't know. But how could you not have more than 50% approval among self-identified MAGA Republicans? Why don't they support this in greater numbers? And can you win elections that way? And I guess it really doesn't matter because they don't really plan on winning elections. They just really plan on seizing power at some point. I mean, well, how would they seize power? Well, how could they see? That's a good question. How do they seize power unless there's more than 50% approval for, seizing power? But I guess they'll get to the complications of it later. Anyway, as a 22-year-old political neophyte, Mr. Irizarry is the underdog in the race. A number of other January 6 participants who have run for office around the country this season have lost, including Derek Evans, a former West Virginia state lawmaker who pleaded guilty to a felony for his role in the attack and was defeated in a Republican primary for a congressional seat there in May. So at least that happened. No one has made it all the way to Congress yet, I don't think, as a rioter. I'm not even well, of course, some of them were already in Congress and were pro-rioters, but I don't know if any of these made it from the outside. Still, the conflicting feelings about the attack among MAGA Republicans have put Mr. Ligon in an awkward position. In an interview on Thursday, he declined to answer when asked whether voters should hold January 6th against Mr. Irizarry. He wouldn't even answer. I'm afraid. You can't even say, my opponent is the wrong guy for the job. Maybe you might have a problem. I'm not going to speak for the voters, he said. It's the job, but whatever. According to court records, Mr. Irizarry spent his early years in Montclair, New Jersey. Uh-oh. That's close to home. where his family struggled economically, which, you know, it happens even in Montclair, New Jersey, of course, but less than in Newark, let's say. We grew up in a suburb of New York that boasted how liberal it was, but on the flip side, it was a town full of upper-class families who made fun of our small two-bedroom apartment, his older sister, Aria Irizarry, wrote in a letter to Judge Chutkan. All right. I don't even know, by the way. It just sort of strikes me as unusual. So he grew up in Montclair, and he really would have been basically a Montclair resident until the age, let's say, of 18. Then he went away for his freshman year at the Citadel, and next thing you know, he's storming the Capitol. But on top of that, then he's in court, and the family is writing and saying, rich elites in Montclair were making fun of our two-bedroom apartment. Maybe. But that certainly could happen. And then, I don't know, something, 1, 2, 3, magic, South Carolina legislature. What? Like, why isn't that a bigger issue in this primary? Like, I don't know exactly what Randy Ligon's background is, but it's probably a little more connected to South Carolina. Like, it's interesting that is he not telling me? Maybe he's talking about that instead of the January 6th thing. But, like, I don't see how you can't beat somebody who's like, well, that kid is from New Jersey and was from New Jersey until, like, 20 weeks ago when he filed for this. All right. Well, anyway, I don't know. People are willing to overlook a lot, I guess. He is mentioned in a 2017 newspaper article. Who is? Irizarry? I guess so. 2017 newspaper article for speaking out at a town meeting against a resolution pledging to create a welcoming environment for immigrants, including undocumented ones. So, all right. In 2021, January of 21, he's 19 years old. So, 21, 20, 19, 18, 17. So 19 is 4 years. So he's like 15 years old. He's going to a town meeting, presumably in Montclair, New Jersey, and speaking out against a resolution pledging to create a welcoming environment for immigrants. By the way, anyone know what sort of surname Irizarry is? You want to look that one up? Eventually, his family moved to South Carolina. Oh, okay. That explains it. Who says Mr. Irizarry, who was involved in the military's junior ROTC program and the Civil Air Patrol, set his sights on the Citadel with the aim of becoming an officer in the Air Force, which, again, a federal conviction, ordinarily stands in the way. But a juvenile conviction, well, he was 19. So I don't know. Let's just throw out all the rule books. And the guy wants to be in the Air Force, so what the hell? Let's let him do it. I don't know. It was a fellow Civil Air Patrol members who recognized him in wanted posters that the FBI distributed as it sought to identify January 6 participants who had been captured on video. You would think you would not make it through the Citadel with this on your back. Federal officials in court documents said that Mr. Irizarry and two friends, Elliot Bishai and Grayson Sherrill, marched to the Capitol after attending Mr. Trump's Stop the Steal rally nearby. Remember, in scare quotes, stop the steal. There was no steal, and they didn't stop anything. Mr. Sherrill, at one point, swung a metal pole at a police officer. At another point, Mr. Bishai yelled, "Civil War II." Well, they are from South Carolina, and from the Citadel at that. And, that would be troublesome to me when it comes time to commission officers in the Air Force. Did you storm the Capitol? Yeah. Were you with a friend in the Civil Air Patrol who swung a metal pole at a police officer? Yeah. Did your other friend yell Civil War II? And are we particularly sensitive to that because South Carolina? Yeah. Welcome to the Air Force Officer Corps. Eventually, Mr. Irizarry climbed through scaffolding to the building's Upper West Terrace, where he waved fellow rioters toward the stairs. After entering the Capitol, he wandered around with his metal pole, shot video in a Senate conference room, also dumb. That's bad. Operational security, I believe, military types or wannabes call it. Rode an elevator. Nothing wrong with that, except, shouldn't have been in the building. And hung around in the rotunda. He left 27 minutes later. He was arrested in March of 2021. That didn't even take long. And pleaded not guilty to 4 misdemeanors. In December 2022, the Citadel suspended him for conduct unbecoming a cadet, but said he could reapply for admission. So if we change our minds about what treason is, we'll let you know. Oh, we did. We changed our mind. What do you know? So, by the way, he pleaded not guilty to 4 misdemeanors, but at some point, I guess, the court disagreed with him about how not guilty he was. None of it squelched his interest in politics. At some point after his arrest, Mr. Irizarry inquired about working as an intern for U.S. Representative Ralph Norman, a far-right legislator who represents the northern stretch of South Carolina where Mr. Irizarry had finished high school. Okay. Well, that tells me a little bit about when he moved to, and it does help explain things. So now he's got deep roots in South Carolina. That works out a little bit better. I mean, if he at least graduated from high school there, that's something. Anyway, that is it's kind of interesting how this worked. Also, like how he squares the whole career path thing. Like, I'm going to go to the Citadel. Maybe at some point he realizes I'm suspended from the Citadel. They allowed me to reapply for admission, and I did it. But this whole idea of I'm going to be an officer in the Air Force based on this is clearly out the window now that I've been, arrested for rebellion against the United States. And maybe I think that that'll make things tough in the Air Force. So I'll try this politics thing instead. It's one or the other. Anyway. Okay. Where are we here? Oh, David O'Neill. Here we are. David O'Neill, a member of the South Carolina House who served as Mr. Norman's district director at the time. I see. District director for, again, Norman being a member of the U.S. House, but David O'Neill serving in this South Carolina House said he thought that the hire was a great idea, but that Mr. Norman's chief of staff rejected the idea. He was actually keeping an eye on things and said, the optics of him working in the Capitol that he was charged with trespassing in was just not a good look, Mr. O'Neill said in an interview. So Mr. O'Neill eventually found Mr. Irizarry a job as a page in the state capitol in Columbia. He's a good kid, Mr. O'Neill told the state newspaper at the time. He made a mistake. Eventually, Mr. Irizarry pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor trespassing charge as part of a plea deal. So how do you plead? Not guilty. Okay. You took video of yourself in the building. Oh, I actually plead guilty, now that I think about it. Okay, well, to a misdemeanor as part of a plea deal. Before his sentencing hearing in March, teachers, relatives, and friends wrote to Judge Chutkan vouching for his character and noting his good grades and record of volunteer work. I have no evidence that he has given up or resigned himself to an ignominious future, wrote, Dubose Kapeluk. This is my best guess at the pronunciation. The then chair of the Citadel's Political Science Department. Judge, I have no evidence that he has given up or resigned himself. All right. I mean, I have some evidence. He was charged and eventually pleaded guilty to storming the Capitol and was, in fact, suspended from the Citadel. But I guess there's countervailing evidence. We let him back in, and he finished his classes. Judge Chutkan said in court that day that she had slept fitfully before his sentencing, calling it one of the most difficult I have had among her many January 6th cases, given Mr. Irizarry's youth and his commendable record before the breach. The government took a different position. They were the prosecutors, of course, recommending 45 days in prison and painting Mr. Irizarry as an unremorseful character. Prosecutors said that he and Mr. Bashai participated in a group chat titled Civil War after the attack, in which they discussed using small planes to cross borders undetected. Remember, Civil Air Patrol. And discussed joining the Russian army if they were kicked out of the United States. Now, I don't think anybody was actually talking about kicking him out of the United States. I mean, we should have been talking about kicking him out of the United States. If I don't get back into the Citadel and get myself a commission in the United States Air Force, I'll join the Russian army. Well, that's really something. I would have not slept all that fitfully, honestly. But Judge Chutkan was swayed by Mr. Irizarry's note of contrition. This is not who you are. This is one thing you did. That and discussing joining the Russian army. She told him. She ordered him to be jailed for 14 days. Later, she wrote a letter to the Citadel on Mr. Irizarry's behalf as he sought reinstatement at the school. In it, she said he had displayed impressive sincerity, remorse, and a determination to make amends. I mean, I guess maybe at some point he displayed that. I haven't really seen it. The Citadel, a public school, by the way, founded in Charleston, South Carolina in 1842, commands a special place of respect in a state that puts a high value on military service. I mean, you really do get a boost locally, nationally. Everyone knows the Citadel, I think. But you really get a boost in life being a Citadel graduate. And they had to decide, are we going to lend that name to this guy who was participating in the storming of the Capitol and online chatting with his friends about civil war, and maybe I'll join the Russians? And they said, yeah, we should, because honor. I don't know. Anyway, it's known for putting its cadets through grueling physical and mental challenges, and for its code of honor, which usually says, if at first you don't succeed, defect and join the Russians. I believe that's the official code of honor, apparently, at the Citadel. They say it says, a cadet does not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. Unless they're applying for readmission, I guess. The school reinstated Mr. Irizarry at the start of the 2023 academic year. A spokeswoman declined to explain the school's reasoning. Can't. On May 4th, Mr. Irizarry graduated, magna cum laude. Look, I mean, if you got the grades, you got the grades, but is there no latitude? And they're like, really? The laude part? Like, he stormed the Capitol. He served prison time. Only 14 days, that's true, because he apparently showed the judge some contrition. But I mean, you can't just say, you have these grades, that's great, but we're not awarding you Latin honors. Having been arrested, sentenced to federal jail time, and had to reapply for admission. You got booted out of the Citadel, but here's some laude for you. Anyway, Mr. Irizarry had already begun running for Mr. Ligon's seat by that time. In April, he paid a visit to a local Republican Party meeting in Chester County, where he and Mr. Ligon were invited to speak briefly. Neither mentioned January 6th. So that's on him. Mr. Ligon, 63 years old, who owns a real estate company, spoke about his wife of 40 years, the sanctity of the Second Amendment. Wait a minute, what? 40, okay, I was not doing the math correctly. 63, his wife of 40 years, he's 13, no, okay, 63, not 53. Got married young, sanctity of the Second Amendment, never mind the sanctity of the Capitol building, whatever, and a flood of immigrants coming across the border that want to infiltrate our elections, which is so happening in Rock Hill. Mr. Irizarry told the group that the state Republican Party had become unmoored from fiscally conservative principles, suggesting that tax dollars were being unwisely spent to subsidize electric car plants. I can't decide. It actually sounds like Mr. Ligon is the more MAGA of the two. But whatever. A down-ticket rural contest like this one usually plays out not on physical hustings, but with social media, yard signs, push polls, and texts. Online, Mr. Irizarry's supporters have written posts calling him a Trump-supporting J6 patriot and a J6 prisoner. 14 days. Prisoner intent on putting America first. Mr. Ligon has received the endorsement of Mr. Trump. How do you like that? Mr. Irizarry has been endorsed by Mr. Norman and the Republican Party of York County, the other county that the district partially covers. Try and untangle that one. After the Chester County meeting, James Reinhart, 80, A retired radiologist and vice chair of the county Republican Party said he was voting for Mr. Ligon, who he has known personally for years, but he commended Mr. Irizarry for running. The January 6th insurrection, he said, shouldn't have happened. But he said he also said it had been blown out of proportion by the Democrats to the Democrats' advantage. Mr. Irizarry, in a coat and tie, was still working the room, surrounded by a gaggle of fellow clean-cut cadets who had come to show support. He seems to be a bright young man, Dr. Reinhardt said. I like him because he's got a haircut. And he went to the Citadel. How do you like that? Well, that's how much the Citadel speaks for you in South Carolina. Plus, I made fun of it, but he did have a haircut. And as you know, that's everything, I guess, in South Carolina. I like him because but he is voting for the other guy. We should point that out because, as it turns out, I've seen a picture of Mr. Ligon, and he, too, has got a haircut, though he's covering it with a hat for the most part. But anyway, there you have it. Thinking of not voting? Know somebody who thinks they might want to sit the election out because any particular pet issue, whatever it might be, you tell them that those guys are voting.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm still kind of fascinated by what happened at the end of the article. It's just really interesting. I mean, how do you explain politics like this? Everybody understand. I guess somebody out of the country would understand, I guess, if you said in terms of like, well, aren't politics complicated where you are too? Wouldn't it be difficult for you to explain? And so when we're trying to unravel whether it's European parliamentary politics or Israel and its situation, here you have Irizarry running as running against the incumbent Ligon or whatever his name is. He's got Trump's endorsement, but he's running against the guy who is what Trump would call and does call at his rallies and did so again yesterday, incredible patriots, the January 6th prisoners, the political prisoners. You would think that guy would get his endorsement. It's interesting. I don't even know how often, and I don't know whether there was any conscious decision making about it. Probably not. I mean, that's why it's not worth explaining the complexities of it, I guess, to some extent, the way Trump makes his endorsements. If he were systematically endorsing all January 6th defendants who were running for office, you would be able to understand that. It's a bad idea, whatever, but you'd be able to understand that. Or if he were systematically avoiding endorsing January 6th rioters, but still calling them incredible patriots, you could even understand that, but it's all haphazard. It's, I endorsed whoever sucks up to me first, and it comes to my attention first. Like, I'm sure he never held out to say, I don't know, Randy Ligon, he says the right things about immigration. Should I endorse him? Or should I wait because he's got a guy running against him who is a January 6th defendant? And I know how I speak about those people at the rallies. People are going to expect that I'm going to endorse him. But instead, I don't know, he just jumps out and makes an irrational decision. And there's still time. It may very well be I guess there's not time if the primary is tomorrow. But it could have happened somewhere along the way that news, or if you could get to the right person to put a slip of paper in front of Donald Trump's face and say there's a January 6th guy running for office in South Carolina, don't you want to endorse him? Yes, I do. And someone might or might not say, you've endorsed the other guy in the race already. I did? So screw that. I'm going to endorse the other guy anyway. I mean, he might very well have done it. I endorse both of them. They're very, very fine people on both sides, except they're not on both sides, of course. They're both running for MAGA approval. Anyway, there you have it. And remember, no Democrat in that race. So whichever way you slice it, you're going to get one of these two wackadoodles. You might as well go for the one who, I don't know. You know what? I can't endorse anybody in this thing. It's crazy. It's a no-win situation. Get the hell out of there. Move to Montclair if you need something to do. All right. Well, anyway, it's rather amazing, all of this. And time to jump back, though, into Pocket and find the other articles about which I thought I might spend some additional time. There is, of course, let's see. There's some good writing about the D-Day reactions from Steve Bannon at the Maddow blog, expressing, what we'll say are correct sentiments about all this stuff, railing against Biden's D-Day rhetoric. The right gives away the game. I mean, you know where we're going with this, but it's a short read. The more the right complains about President Joe Biden's D-Day remarks on democracy and U.S. alliances, the more conservatives give away the game. Again, Steve Bannon writing in 2017, on the 4th of July, NPR, this is like a flashback for you, same sort of thing happening here, good comparison. 4th of July, 2017, NPR published a series of tweets including, or that were, the text of the Declaration of Independence. It seemed like a simple patriotic gesture to help celebrate our Independence Day. A surprising number of Republicans didn't quite see it that way. Do you remember this at all? And he links back to Amy Wang's story about it in the Washington Post. Some Trump supporters thought NPR tweeted propaganda. It was, in fact, of course, the Declaration of Independence. In other words, they thought this was, the rhetoric of the Declaration of Independence was propaganda against Trump because he's a dictator and doesn't respect democracy and wanted to set himself up as a king. We knew this even in 2017, so they were railing against it, except, foundational document. Whoops. The more NPR published portions of the Declaration of Independence, the more rank and file conservatives, who apparently didn't recognize the words of the document, assumed that the media outlet was publishing anti-Trump propaganda. And in one of the quotes, of course, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people, one tweet read, sparking particular outrage from the right, who assumed the missive was directed at the then Republican president. It was an early reminder, just 6 months into Donald Trump's term, that many of his followers, when confronted with core American principles, would simply assume they were anti-Trump criticisms. In 2016, for example, Barack Obama spoke at an event at Pearl Harbor and told attendees, even when hatred burns hottest, even when the tug of tribalism is at its most primal, we must resist the urge to turn inward. We must resist the urge to demonize those who are different. Trump, naturally, assumed the Democratic president was directing the comments at him. Well, what do you know? Just as a certain Supreme Court justice and Supreme Court justice's wife who saw the sign that said F Trump thought it was specifically about him and her who are not named Trump. But, maybe that's human nature. You think everything is about you. 5 years later, George W. Bush, is that right? 5 years later? George W. Bush delivered remarks in Pennsylvania from the field where Flight 93 crashed. quote, a malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument and every argument into a clash of cultures, the former president said. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. Trump also saw this as a personal attack. Okay. And while there are plenty of other similar examples, the issue returned to the fore late last week when President Joe Biden delivered a pair of speeches in France in recognition of the anniversary of D-Day. The incumbent Democrat did not utter his predecessor's name, but Biden did celebrate democracy and U.S. alliances while condemning tyranny, authoritarianism, and isolationism. Republican Rick Scott of Florida called the remarks disgusting. A Fox Business host also accused the Democrat of taking veiled shots at Trump. As New York Magazine's John Chait noted, some other prominent voices from conservative media had similar reactions. Breitbart's Joel Pollack complains that Biden's speech was a veiled attack on his domestic political opposition in the upcoming election. Eric Erickson moans, I don't think it was appropriate for Biden to turn the remembrance of D-Day into a political attack on his opponent. As we discussed last week, Bannon says, I'm mindful of the circumstances. In the United States, it's an election season, and the incumbent president is poised to be on the ballot, in which he'll share with his immediate predecessor, who's increasingly brazen about his overt affinity for authoritarians and authoritarianism. When Biden defends and celebrates democracy, his words do not exist in a political vacuum. They carry a broader significance. But given what the Democrat actually said and the principles he touted, some on the right are saying more than they intended with their complaints and condemnations of Biden's inoffensive, patriotic rhetoric. Okay. And, yep, that's pretty much the point of that. I told you it was a quick read, but well said. And good reminder that this has happened several times before. This is a chronic problem with these guys. All right. Let's see. Other items of interest. I told you ProPublica has published a new piece on Clarence Thomas, and I guess it's insightful, it's interesting that it lays out the problems that he was facing financially and his concerns about it, but it also lays out an unusual disregard for the things that might have led them to the brink of financial ruin, I suppose, to say the least. And I don't know. While I'd recommend the entirety of the article to you, I'll just read you some of the introduction to set the stage for you. This is their piece is under the title of A Delicate Matter. That's in quotes, delicate matter. Clarence Thomas's private complaints about money sparked fears he would resign. This is Justin Elliott, Joshua Kaplan, Alex Mirjeski, and Brett Murphy. Is Murphy new to this team? But this is the usual squad who have been writing all of this continuing investigation into Clarence Thomas, and we appreciate it very much. Interviews and newly unearthed documents reveal that Thomas, facing financial strain, privately pushed for a higher salary, and that's okay, and to allow Supreme Court justices to take speaking fees, which is probably not okay. Anyway, this is set in early January 2000. As we mentioned earlier, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas was at a 5-star beach resort in Sea Island, Georgia, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Like, I just can't make sense of that. Maybe he was there for a conference, possibly. I don't know. But yeah, if you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, Sea Island, Georgia, maybe not the spot I'd be at, especially if I were, on the record publicly as saying I prefer camping in Walmart parking lots as my mode of vacation. Anyway, after almost a decade on the court, Thomas had grown frustrated with his financial situation, according to friends. He'd recently started raising his young grandnephew, and Thomas's wife was soliciting advice on how to handle the new expenses. Okay. I mean, well, one way to handle the new expenses is public school, not private school. But of course, they chose an expensive private, and I think a boarding school as well. Although, I mean, I guess you could argue, I don't know, I forget where the kid was living. I mean, if he's boarding in an area that he's used to living in rather than moving to Washington, D.C. I could see not uprooting him, but whatever. But another thing I might do if I was worried about the expenses is not do this, which is 1, go to Sea Island, Georgia. And 2, remember I told you he says he preferred parking an RV in the parking lot of Walmart and vacationing there. Okay, fine. Maybe, though, not do this. Thomas's wife is now soliciting advice on how to handle the new expenses. Apparently, one of the new expenses is the month before, the next sentence says, the justice had borrowed $267,000 from a friend to buy a high-end RV. So, okay, that too would be like, hey, honey, do you think we should vacation in Sea Island, Georgia, given our financial situation, or the parking lot at Walmart? Well, parking lot at Walmart. Okay, well, we'll need an RV for that. What do you say to this $250,000 RV? Yes. You say yes? Okay. And then we'll go on vacation. Oh, wait, you know what, though? Leave the RV parked here. We got a $250,000 RV last month, but I wanted to go on a vacation. I'm not talking about one of those stupid fake vacations that you like to do. I'm talking Sea Island, Georgia, where we'll go and sit on the beach and worry about how much we're in debt. I could see a way through this where you're not as worried about your debt. But also you should keep in mind that if that sounds crazy to you, well, 1, it is. But 2, one way of explaining it is when you say borrowed $267,000 from a friend for this RV, comes with a huge wink. There's no way in hell that you're ever going to repay this money to your friend. It is not a loan. It is a bribe. And everyone should understand it that way. And I don't know whether the rest of the article really, runs that way and hints at this. But I mean, to the extent he's worried about his finances, I'll bet you one of those worries is not, how am I going to pay back this $267,000 for this RV? It is well understood by that point, a month later, that this is a free RV, which is why you don't feel bad or dumb leaving it parked at home while you go to Sea Island, Georgia, because it's now clear to you that despite the fact, how am I going to pay for the expenses of my kid? Or my grandnephew. Well, I have a pretty good idea how you could do it. Maybe you could do it with the money of the person who sent you to Sea Island, Georgia, and gave you a $250,000 quote unquote loan for your RV. Maybe they'll start paying it. If that seems outlandish to you, recall the fact that, actually we did find out that he did pay for all of that. Well, that's the solution. And yet he's petitioning members of Congress. I need more money. I need to be able to take outside speaking fees because I can't manage financially on this salary, except for the fact that I am managing on this salary. And I'm at a 5-star resort and I have a $250,000 RV and my grandnephew is going to a private boarding school for free. I figured out how to manage my finances, but I would still like to be able to rake in cash from speaking fees. That's who we're talking about. Clarence Thomas. All right. So, then there's the rest of it about the mechanics of how he manages to find himself on the way home, sitting next to a member of Congress on the plane. And he says to him, Congress should give the Supreme Court justices a pay raise. If lawmakers didn't act, quote, 1 or more justices will leave soon, maybe in the next year. It is alleged, he says to his seatmate here. That is, I think, Cliff Stearns. Did they mention that? Is it in here? Or did I pick that up elsewhere or later on in the article? Is I think who he's talking to. And it's interesting. And it goes on to say, that essentially, maybe it must be later on that they tell you who the person is, because basically this member of Congress was saying, this is troublesome to me because Clarence Thomas is so important to us as a conservative, i.e. somebody who will rule basically exactly as we direct him to, no matter how crazy it is for him to do so. I can't afford to lose that person on the Supreme Court. Here we are. Thomas's comments in 2000 were to Florida Representative Cliff Stearns, a vocal conservative who'd been in Congress for 11 years and occasionally socialized with the justice. They set off a flurry of activity across the judiciary and Capitol Hill. His importance as a conservative was paramount. Stearns said in a recent interview, "We wanted to make sure he felt comfortable in his job and he was being paid properly." This worried him a great deal because even though they would have been able to get another conservative on the court, and this is in 2000. So it's early 2000. They don't know whether maybe Al Gore is going to win the election or whatever. But by the end of 2000, of course, it's clear they're going to award the election, despite the actual outcome of the election, to George W. Bush, at which point they could have said, this, gone enough with them. I mean, Cliff Stearns wouldn't have said it, but maybe some other who speaks Yiddish would have said, enough with this guy. Oh, boo-hoo, I need more money. I understand the pressure, but you seem to have solved the problem. There's a billionaire paying for your grandnephew to go to school. It's a billionaire giving you a $250,000 RV. It's a billionaire paying for you to go to vacation in Sea Island, Georgia, and elsewhere, and later on give you use of his super yacht and his private jet. You've solved the problem. Stop complaining. But no, he kept complaining anyway, and they have to start worrying about. But apparently, the reason they're paying attention to his complaining is not that it makes any sense, but that he'll do whatever we say. He's a constant vote for whatever we want, regardless of the logic of it. And that's somebody that we just have to keep happy. Meanwhile, he's also proposing, essentially, well, I'm mad because I see my clerks, for instance, going on to private practice and becoming partners in prestigious law firms because they clerked for me and making much, much more than I do. And that's not fair. But on the other hand, billionaires aren't giving them RVs and letting them fly around the world on their private planes, but they are getting cash so that they can afford to pay for their own vacations. And that makes me angry for some reason. I want to have that much cash. But that's supposed to be the trade-off of being a Supreme Court justice. You get lots and lots of power and influence, but by the same token, you don't get a very high pay package. And you have to choose one or the other. And Clarence Thomas is saying, isn't it possible for me to have both? Can't I have as much money as private practitioners, but also as much power as a Supreme Court justice? And the answer to that is supposed to foundationally be no. But he's very upset that the answer is no, and couldn't it possibly be yes? And that's the foundation of why he's become such a corrupt person. So, just thought I would throw that out there. And you can read the article and catch up with the particulars in the next couple of days. Let's see. Now, relatedly, I guess we could say, why don't we spend, there's not that much time left. We can spend the time reading this other New York Times piece reported by Carl Hulse. Is it Hulse or Hulsey? Hulse. Again, well-known reporter. We don't speak the names out loud all that often, except here on the radio, where we realize, hey, I don't know how to say this guy's name. Senate Democrats face escalating calls for broader investigation into Supreme Court. Imagine that. They say, though, their options are limited by the court's status as a separate branch of government, which is true. It is a separate branch of government. And they are somewhat constrained by all this, and deep Republican opposition. Shall we dive into their position? I mean, they're right insofar as, there's a constitution and we have separation of powers. But at the same time, you should keep in mind what we mentioned earlier. There is another, is it New York Times or Washington Post that did the story on, what's his name? Russell Vogt. Where is that story and how come it's apparently buried? Did I not park it? All right. Well, at any rate, here it is. It's the Washington Post story, which is headlined, Trump loyalist pushes, quote, post-constitutional, unquote, vision for second term. Russ Vought, the president's former budget director, is laying the groundwork for a broad expansion of presidential powers, is the way they put it, as though it were just regular constitutional hardball. That's the Beth Reinhard piece that everyone's talking about from the Washington Post, which I summarized for everybody on Blue Sky by saying, eliminating the Constitution just as the founders intended. And and it's pretty much essentially rebranding opposition to the Constitution as being post-constitutional. In other words, the things we want to do, here they are, and you say about them, well, those things are all unconstitutional. And they now correct you and say, it's post-constitutional. And that makes it sound as though it's somehow intellectually grounded. But it is, in fact, well, the difference between something being unconstitutional and being post-constitutional is this. If it's unconstitutional, that's when you overstep a boundary and you recognize it because you say, this is the boundary, and you are now beyond that boundary. That is bad, and we can undo it. That's what a court would normally do, undo it and reset the boundaries and say, this is how far you can go. Being post-constitutional, however, is saying we've eliminated the boundary. Now, the thing you are talking about, it used to be considered unconstitutional, but we now have argued our way to saying the boundary against it is invalid. And or maybe even the whole Constitution is invalid, and you can go ahead and do it. And it's okay. It's not unconstitutional. It's just post-constitutional. And it is, with that in mind, I guess we need to examine that whole article, but we only have 5 minutes or so left to do it. And so we'll examine this. With that as background, you should be reading and understanding what the New York Times was framing as the barriers to Democrats suggesting that maybe there would be a broader investigation into the Supreme Court. We can't do it because the Constitution stands in the way. Whereas on the other side, people are planning the second Trump administration saying the Constitution does not stand in the way because we're post-Constitution now. And by the way, most of Russ Vogt's justification for that is, well, the Democrats did it first. They destroyed the Constitution. We're simply following that up. Of course, if you ask the Democrats, what can you do about the Supreme Court? They'll say, nothing, because we haven't destroyed the Constitution. Well, let's read a little bit about that. Senate Democrats are facing intensifying pressure from the left and elsewhere for inquiries into ethical questions at the Supreme Court. Like whether or not you should take all this money and whether or not you're entitled to all the power of the Supreme Court plus all the money of the private sector. But they say their options are limited given the court's independent status and Republican opposition. Advocacy groups and progressives are stepping up their calls for Senate Democrats to be more aggressive after Chief Justice John Roberts rebuffed the plea to require Justice Alito to recuse himself from the pending cases of the January 6th assault on the Capitol and Donald Trump's immunity for any actions leading up to it. Which, do they even really need him to continue to do this since they're just going to start electing legislators who are going to say, actually, January 6th was a good thing? Top Democrats on the Judiciary Committee called on Justice Alito to recuse himself from those cases following reports that, of course, 2 flags associated with the Stop the Steal movement were flown outside his residences. The justice says his wife was responsible for the flags and refused to step away from the cases. Earlier this week, a coalition of liberal groups and House Democrats urged the Senate to open an investigation into Alito's actions, with activists arguing that the Senate needed to stop behaving as if it were powerless. Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, the 2 top Democrats on the Oversight Committee, have scheduled a round table on the issue for next Tuesday. Why a round table? Because, of course, they're in the minority in their committees and they can't have actual hearings. So it's set to explore a range of controversies surrounding the court, including unreported gifts and travel provided to the justices and their impact on the court's agenda. The whole country is caught in a supreme ethics crisis, Mr. Raskin said in a statement. Our democracy, voting rights, and the fundamental rights of everyone are on the line, and everything we have fought for is in danger because of this runaway court. Senate Democrats have struggled with how to respond to ethics controversies ensnaring the court. They, of course, are in the majority in their body and yet still feel that their hands are tied. They have cited the refusal of members of the court to engage with them and fierce opposition from Republicans who portrayed the Democratic effort as a partisan one designed to undermine the credibility of a court dominated by conservatives. Keep in mind, it's a separate branch of government, and it has its own authority, said Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois, the number 2 Senate Democrat and chairman of the Judiciary Committee. There are precedents as to what we can and cannot do. All true, except Republicans don't actually believe in any of those precedents. I'll break off at this point because we're, of course, out of time, and remind you that that other article that hangs out there about Russ Vogt is all about saying, oh, I don't actually care about what those principles of constitutional government are. We're going to undo them. Up to and including, he was the budget guy. He says he's got new plans that he wants to add to Project 2025 that will allow, as he says, the future, in his view, President Trump in his second term, if term of office is something we even want to discuss anymore, will be able to single-handedly impound funds designated for spending by Congress, who has, of course, the purse strings, and he can put a stop to that, as he wanted to do with funds that were destined for the defense of Ukraine. But if he doesn't like the program, but Congress funds it nonetheless, he should be able to single-handedly impound those funds. Now, we've been through that process. We've had that test. Nixon attempted to do the same thing. The Supreme Court told him in no uncertain terms that was beyond the power of the presidency. There's nothing textually anywhere in the Constitution that suggests such a power. And in fact, that power is explicitly put in the hands of Congress, and they're the ones who will direct how Treasury funds will be spent. But Russ Vogt says, well, to hell with that. You've all misunderstood the Constitution. We think it shouldn't apply. And anyway, aren't you really the hypocrites here for having destroyed the Constitution yourselves in the first place, Democrats? Except, like, if you actually ask Democrats, what do you think you're able to do? They're constantly saying, no, we're constrained by the Constitution, which is an odd way of destroying the Constitution and bringing us to post-constitutional period in the United States. But that's Vogt's claim. Nonetheless, that's the excuse he's offering. And what can I tell you? There's a party that believes it.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, we've reached the end of our time, and thank God, none too soon since we've reached the limits of my voice. But Justice Putnam will follow us up right here on Netroots Radio with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and his voice is probably just fine. So stay tuned, and if he's not, he'll still struggle through an hour with you to keep you updated on all the things we've missed to date. We'll see you tomorrow.